Greetings ladies and gents, and welcome to this match video for Mud's mission taken from the website Royal Road. As always, I hope that you all enjoy this episode, and if you do, please consider supporting the channel. Also, all of these episodes will be available as a podcast on the various different podcast platforms. All the links will be down below. Chapter 41, Master Smith. In the orange light of the furnace ingot pounded a red-hot piece of metal into shape. Satisfied with its shape, the dwarf lifted up the glowing metal with his metal left hand and quenched it in a barrel of murky white fluid. Lifting the completed work from the steam-faded, Ingot examined it. The smith found no flaw with the cook-pan, but still he grimaced. Such simplistic work was below him, but was required to keep food on the table for him and his family. Sighing, he placed the pot on a nearby pile and placed a new hunk of metal into the forge. Just as he prepared to begin his work, the sound of the door chime caught his attention. "Oh, a customer at this time of night." Humans, unlike dwarves, were diurnal by nature. As a result, a vast majority of his sales happened during the day, handled by his assistants. Still, for Ingot, every sale was vital. Immigrating to Galtheus with his family and setting up the shop after his apprenticeship ended had used up nearly all of his savings. Quickly pulling a piece of metal out of the furnace, his metal arm, the dwarf straightened out his beard and adjusted his clothes as best he could, then made his way to the front counter. "Hello, I'm here. Just a moment." The blacksmith saw what he rounded the corner in the store and lowered his spirits somewhat. The potential customer appeared to be a very young human wearing some absurd costume. A black robe and a mask covering a child's features made it clear that he was trying to look mysterious. Young delvers were something to prove were absolute worst customers to deal with. They frequently acted entitled and felt themselves above civilians and craftsmen. Fortunately, this likely wouldn't be the waste of the dwarf's time. The mask appeared to be a runecraft, so the kid at least had some money. "I'm the owner of the shop, and the name's Ingot. Is there anything specific you're looking for?" The child's head swiveled around wildly, almost seemed as though it didn't have a spine. The way the head whipped around wildly was every corner of the store. Ingot had seen plenty of children overwhelmed by the various weapons and armor that it had on display in the past, but this was different. Rather than examining the merchandise, it was more resembled the way scouts had acted a few times Ingot had gone on hunting expeditions. Without replying, the strange child approached the low counter. Upon reaching the table, it slid a fold of paper out of its robe and set it on the countertop. "I wish to have this design crafted. Why do you not have your arm healed?" Strangely monotone voice of a young human boy appeared in the blacksmith's mind. The cadence reminded Ingot of ego artifacts its teacher had crafted, which were capable of mental communication. Perhaps this child was unable or unwilling to talk, and had acquired such an artifact to speak in its stead. Putting aside the thoughts for now, Ingot returned its focus to the customer's questions. "Ha! Most folks around here don't give the guts to ask me that sort of question. Humans are so easily offended." Ingot lifted his heavy metal arm to be more easily inspected. The arm was made by 2 rods of blue-tinted metal held together by an orb of glowing purple light where an elbow, wrist, and shoulder would normally have been. The hand was a disc of the same metal, and 5 small cones of metal floating around it. "It's not a cursed wound or anything like that. I had my old arm removed because this is better. It doesn't burn, it doesn't shake, and I can make perfectly precise movements with it." To demonstrate, Ingot moved his fingers rapidly through several complex formations, bringing the points together perfectly, making a circle with point to base, and other shapes. All the while, he smiled wide. This arm was his pride, his masterwork which allowed him to graduate from apprentice to have the honor of owning his own store. With some reluctance, he finally stopped showing off and picked up the customer's opener, opening it up to inspect the design. What he saw was hard to understand. It was a very accurate drawing of something that could exist, and even better, it had exact measurements and proportions listed out. This was already more than he usually got from the custom request from a delver. What made it difficult was the complete lack of any design conventions that he'd ever seen. The measurements were placed seemingly at random, and were connected with parts of the design with the reference table. The number values were also complex, requiring mathematical equations instead of actual numbers for many of the values. Perhaps most strangely of all, despite the high level of detail on the design, there was no material specified. "What kind of metal do you want this made out of?" Not taking his eyes off the bewildering design sheet, Ingrid directed the question towards the young human. The child responded by placing a small Associan coin bag on the counter. "I am not knowledgeable on the comparative advantages of all available metals. Use the most suitable metal that this much money can afford." Ingrid raised an eyebrows and set the paper aside to check the pouch. With a glance, he could tell many gold coins, a rather large sum of mundane object, and was surprised for a human to so directly trust a craftsman in this way. Amongst dwarves, trusting the honor of a merchant to give you something worth your gold was common sense, but not so much with humans. Raising his opinion of the young boy a notch, the dwarf asked a few more questions as he carefully counted the coins. "What do you plan to use this for?" "The purpose of this object is to defend me from attacks, particularly slicing attacks." Ingrid nodded in his head. "This could certainly be used that way, although it would be difficult. Why not just use a shield? What weapon skills do you have?" "A shield would be too large and cumbersome. I have skills with unarmed combat and hidden weapons and string manipulation." Stopping his counting, Ingrid quickly moved back to the design document. "String manipulation, you say?" Yes, I can see it. This could certainly be useful. Do you mind if I modify some aspects of the design? I believe I can improve the articulation and durability by redesigning the connections." "I was informed that you are an expert at crafting items out of metal, so I accept your judgment in all aspects of design." This was exactly the kind of challenge that led Ingrid to leave his homeland. While some masters are content to spend their whole lives crafting the same heavy plate armor, hammers, and shields that dwarves love, what Ingrid loved was innovation. New concepts, strange ideas, unique quirks on old weapon designs. That's why a shop in a human city known for the creativity was ideal. And even better, a town with a dungeon to attract those insane delver types. Ingrid slammed the plans down on the table and extended his calloused, meaty right hand towards the human. "You got yourself a deal. I'll begin the work on it immediately." The child stared at the hand for a moment, seemingly not knowing what to do. A moment later, the dwarf heard a strange mechanical voice. "Can you have it done before the festival starts?" "Ha!" Ingrid placed a metal hand on his stomach and let out a deep, booming laugh. "You doubt my speed? I'll have it done by this time tomorrow. Now, are you going to shake my hand or what?" The black-cloaked hand reached up and gripped Ingrid's finger, then shook it randomly for a few seconds. So, the kid really didn't know what shaking hands is. Ingrid let out another roaring laughter. End of chapter. Chapter 42. My Own Skill. Delvers Association Youth Warning Services. Location, Gartheus Dungeon. Price, levels 1 to 5, 10 gold each. Levels 6 to 8, 20 gold each. Levels 9 and 10, 40 gold each. Special, raised from 1 to level 11, 150 gold. Best value. Speak to any Delvers Association teller for information of same-day services. Safety is our highest priority. Minimum age 12 years old. Equipment available to rent for small additional fee. Membership not required. Endorsed by the Gartheus City Council. Advert placed in the city of Gartheus' weekly newspaper, the Gartheus Record. Having no further business with the human nest, Mud set off to his domain. Upon returning to the forest, being no longer burdened by the injured humans, Mud took to the treetops, swinging through the treetops on its unique method of locomotion. The increase in statistics made themselves known. The pace at which the golem could now travel through the treetops would be difficult for a sprinting human to keep pace with. Of course, even at this pace, Mud maintained its vigilance. Blind spots were constantly checked at each shadow and potential hiding spot examined for traces of enemy. Over time, the golem had slowly perfected its method of sweeping glances. Originally, the method had been rather primitive. Mud would simply scan left to right repeatedly, first as high as it could and then moving lower with each pass. While this covered the entire range of vision, there were some obvious flaws. Most glaring and patterns were predictable to enemies. A skill opponent might simply hide completely each time his scan passed their location. Another problem was that it treated all directions as equal scrutiny. This was wasteful, as there were certain locations that warranted more attention than others. Mud improved the blind spot removal method by making the movements much more erratic and unpredictable, while making sure to focus more on the likely hiding spots. This specific method had become rather complicated and required a bit of focus to maintain, but Mud was now confident that it had developed a technique with suitable degree of to be relied upon. Just as Mud felt satisfied with the state of its vigilance, a new kind of dialogue appeared in its mind. Author, new skill, blind spot removal to Akashic records. Rewards will be distributed to the author for useful addition. Was the Akashic record recognizing the value of Mud's new technique and offering it to make it a skill? That seemed to be the case. If any intelligence that developed a technique to a suitable degree could author a skill, that certainly explained the massive number of available for purchase with skill points. What the reward would be and how useful it was determined was unclear. There appeared to be no downsides to accepting it, so the specifics were unimportant. Without concern, Mud accepted the creation of the new skill. In the next moment, Mud froze mid-swing and clung to a branch. A strange sensation of foreign mana entering its body suddenly appeared, similar to its experience with the class change orb. Suspecting this was related to the formation of a new skill, Mud didn't resist the mana and allowed it to flow through its body. For some time, the mana flowed over the golem's body and soul. What exactly it was searching for or recording was unclear to the golem. Eventually, the mana retreated. In the next instant, a notification appeared. Blind spot removal skill obtained at level max. Unlike previous times that the golem had gained a new skill, no new information flowed into its mind. Perhaps because Mud itself was the source of the knowledge. There was nothing new to add. Was the skill the reward? Mud hoped that was not, and something greater would be awarded at a later time. Putting the thoughts aside, Mud continued swinging towards home. Upon entering its domain, Mud traveled to the mansion's basement to communicate with the demon. Jibrax, I'm receiving 0 experience from killing monsters. How do I become stronger? The demon lifted her head from the table and attempted to wipe some blood from her face as a clawed hand. Unfortunately, the hand was just as soaked with gore as her face and served only to spread the mess around. After a swallow, she finally answered, Oh, you hit the tier 1 wall with those goblins, eh? We'll need to find a stronger stuff to slaughter. Lucky for us, this town has a dungeon. Grabbing a nearby towel, Jibrax finally managed to clean some of the blood from her face and arms. Have you used up your skill points yet? You shouldn't waste them, but not using them at all is even worse than buying something stupid. At her suggestion, Mud brought up his record. Name, Mud Golem, level 7 Mud Golem, class, level 4 Master Butler Rare. HP 11 out of 11, SP 0 out of 0, MP 220 out of 220. Spells, Psionics, False Bolt, Lesser Telekinesis, and Paracausia. Skills 3, Blind Spot Removal Max, Bodyguard 3, Climbing 4, Cooking Max, Etiquette Max, Hidden Weapons 3, Household Mastery 3, Mathematics 3, Psionics 2, Sneak Attack 5, Stealth 6, Service Max, String Manipulation 5, Torture 1, Unarmed Combat 6, Amorphous Form Rare, Servant's Loyalty Rare, Almanac Unique. 3 skill points were available to make it stronger. Opening up the skill menu, Mud searched for any new options. Several new skills were available and the golem considered the options. Enhanced Skill Cooking, reach level max in Cooking Skill. Enhanced Skill Etiquette, reach level max in Skill Etiquette. Enhanced Skill Service, reach level max in Skill Service. Enhanced Skill Blind Spot Removal, reach level max in Blind Spot Removal. Household Magic, 10 plus maximum mana and a home affinity granted from class. Domain Control, control a domain. To Mud's surprise, there was an option to enhance the Blind Spot Removal skill, even though it had just been created. Putting that thought aside, the golem considered its options. So far, enhancing skills had worked out well 2 times. On the other hand, the 2 completely new options were both considerably attractive. Both appeared to be skills that would assist in maintaining and defending Sithlar Estate. Unfortunately, the major upcoming battle in the dungeon festival would not be located within the domain of the estate. It was possible that the household magic would be useful in other situations, though. Is there any way to know which skill you'll obtain when you enhance a skill? Jibrax was about to return to eating, looked back and frowned. Not really. Those humans that made the record couldn't figure out exactly how knowledge ascension worked. When the same skill is ascended by different people, they get different results. It wasn't as straightforward and easy to quantify as some other things. Is household magic powerful? Stopping once more, and she leaned down towards Bark. Jibrax let out a sigh and spoke over her shoulder. Yeah, it's really strong. At certain things, just pick the one and stop bothering me. Bud looked at each of the option one more time. While domain control likely wouldn't help directly in the upcoming festival, it was a long-term investment that seemed well worth the risk. Household magic was, according to Jibrax, really strong, and it would be nice to have some ways to utilize its mana pool. And for the final choice, Mud decided to enhance the new skill that it had authored, Blind Spot Removal. With a small push of its will, Mud purchased these 3 skills. End of chapter. Chapter 43. Mental Multiprocessing. Blind Spot Removal mutated into Detect Mana skill at level 1. Domain Control skill is obtained at level 1. Household Magic skill obtained at level 1. With 3 new skills came information on their use from the Akashic records. While a mortal mind may have been overloaded from such massive amount of information striking all at once, the mechanical mind of Mud had no problem processing the multi-data streams simultaneously. Having become more familiar with the realm of the soul, Mud noticed that raw information was indeed the only thing coming from the record. An actual source of power that might allow for the new abilities did not accompany the data. The actual power, it seemed, was coming from someplace else. Mud had no more time to ponder the underlying nature of the skills as it came to understand the new acquisitions. Detect Manus was a skill which used a constant, small amount of focus to sense any hostility towards the user. Even now, the golem could feel the icy pick of hatred driving into it from a nearby Jibrax. This method of spotting enemies would likely be very difficult to hide from, although not impossible. Mud itself was perfectly capable of controlling its own mind and thoughts thoroughly enough to launch a surprise attack against such a skill. Similar to the past skill mutations, the change did not remove the ability to use the replaced skill. Mud could continue to visually scan the surroundings as it did before. Domain Control skill would allow Mud to exert greater influence over the existing domain. While the Household Master skill had still granted a powerful tool, Domain Control was a method to utilize it. Merely knowing what was occurring within the domain was not yet a true purpose. It was merely a side effect of making the land a part of Mud's own vision of self. At this time, the muscles used to influence the domain were still weak within the golem. At best, it could cause minor changes like shifting ambient temperature slightly or increasing air pressure. One major problem was that the domain itself was still weak. Household mastery needed to be improved so that the domain control could truly shine. Alongside the new abilities, Mud came to understand the ideal of home. A home was, at its most basic, a place to stay. In its ideal form, a home had many more aspects to consider. The ideal of home was a safe and secure against the unwanted intrusion, a fortress against all that would harm to the occupant, be it weather or beast. Board structure spell obtained. The ideal of home was sturdy and immaculately maintained. The paint was fresh and unblemished. It did not leak, and the floors didn't have a single scratch of scruff. If ever there was an ideal home and damaged, the repair would come swiftly. Repair structure spell obtained. Overall, Mud was satisfied with these new skills. Household magic would be extremely useful if they ever established a temporary base during the festival. Domain would not help directly, but would likely be vital in the long-term power source. Detect Malice was straightforwardly useful for any combat. Jibrax, I've spent my skill points. I now wish to become stronger. What is the best available method? The demon, who was now sewing something together on the table, continued her work without looking back. Training your skills would be good now, but we don't really have time. It would be troublesome for me too if you can't pull your weight. Jirax used her jagged teeth to cut the thread, tying it off before reaching to the side of the mass of meat. Placing it on the table, she began sewing again. Training in combat would be best. You've been exploring a lot lately, right? See any strong beasts in the nearby area, stronger than goblins and wolves? I fought a goblin general and spotted a kobold scout. The human on the table began to stir slightly and moan. After a short blast of smoke from Jirax, he stilled, asleep once more. Do you know where the kobold base is? The demon continued to sew. I do not. It's too risky. We might end up searching for days with nothing to show for it. Finding that goblin camp was a stroke of luck. Well, it's hard to ever consider finding goblins lucky. As she spoke the last words, Mud felt a small, almost imperceptible twinge in detect malice skill. In addition to the constant hatred directed towards itself, it felt a separate thread of malice emanating from the demon. Considering the context, perhaps it was directed towards the goblins in general. The fact that the skill could be used in such a way was an unexpected boon. Detect malice skill has increased to level 2. Bodyguard skill has increased to level 4. Jirax finished off her work and set aside the needle and thread, once again wiping away the blood with the now soaked towel. She walked over to Mud. I suppose the only choice is to check out the famous Galtheus dungeon. Hopefully it's not too overcrowded with the wave coming up. As the pair left the estate once more, she let out a sigh. Going back and forth so often is annoying. Couldn't this old man just build his house in a more normal place? Like inside the city walls? Now we have to suffer because of his idiocy. Mud preferred the secluded location. It was further from the sapiens and easier to do what we pleased without being detected. The demon, too, had benefited from the remote location. Perhaps she simply enjoyed complaining about things, Mud thought. Before, Mud had clung to Jirax as she flew. The golem's weight and awkward shape had slowed her considerably. Thanks to Mud's greatly improved statistics, it was now faster for the golem to simply swing through the treetops as the demon flew alone. While they traveled towards the city, Mud focused on an area of strength that had stalled recently. Psionics hadn't improved for some time. Mud needed a new understanding of the ideal of control to make a breakthrough. Thinking back over recent memories, it reflected on how it had utilized psionics, searching for a hint. Recently, it had been using telekinesis to control its cloak ends. It wasn't particularly useful ability in Mud's opinion, though. Ultimately, it controlled coattails with just an inferior replacement for its own amorphous body. As the goblin considered the similarity between the ribbons and its own tentacles, it came to a realization. Why was it not controlling its own body with telekinesis in the same way? In hindsight, it was obvious. The most important control of all was the ability to control oneself. Psionic skill increased to level 3. Skate spell obtained. Using a minuscule amount of mind mana to form the spell, Mud felt its own weight become lighter. Having attached the spell mid-swing, Mud flew in a much higher arc than it had planned. Grasping wildly for a nearby branch, Mud discovered the second aspect of the skate skill. The friction of its body was reduced to nearly nothing. Unable to grab, as it had expected, Mud slipped off the tree and landed on the forest floor with a wet thump. From now on, Mud vowed to itself, it will always check the spell's description before using it. End of chapter. Chapter 44. Majestic Musings. Attention to all citizens of Galtheus. Report to your designated shelter locations no later than the 19th hour of Logos the 17th. If you do not know the location of your designated shelter, consult the map located at City Hall. Food and water will be provided free of charge for the duration. Civilians found to be breaking curfew will be fined and jailed for the duration. Maximum of 1 cubic unit of luggage allowed per civilian. Magical beasts will not be allowed to enter the shelters under any circumstances. The City of Galtheus recommends finding an out-of-town stabling for pets. The City of Galtheus is not responsible for any damage or loss of life that occurs outside of the shelters. Notice hung on the major intersections of the City of Galtheus. Prince Cain examined the completed stone pillbox situated directly in front of the dungeon entrance and frowned. Are the fortifications not up to your standards, your majesty? A bald, slightly hunched figure in an orange robe tottered over to Cain's side, his carefree smile exposing several missing teeth, betraying his lack of actual concern on the subject. Kane glanced momentarily towards his colleague and shook his head, causing his curly red and white hair to sway with emotion. No, if anything, it's too finely crafted. The prince rubbed one hand against the smooth stone, still cold from the chill of the night. Wasn't this supposed to be my chance to show off to the world? Fighting from the safety of a fortification like this doesn't prove anything except how rich my father is. The great magician of Magnus shook his head and chuckled. That is not how the people will see it, or how the story will be spread. Something like fortifications and tactical positions is too complicated and uninteresting for the masses to care about. Magnus raised a gnarled finger and his eyes unfocused. What they will speak of is the prince fighting valiantly on one front lines, bringing only a tiny force, a handful of elite warriors to aid him. They'll speak of a number of beasts you kill, and the power of your blows. Who cares if you were in the middle of a stone box when you did it? Magnus slapped Kane hard in the back. Some of the tension left the prince's shoulders, and he let out a sigh. I suppose you're right. What's most important is how it looks to the people. I've gotten too caught up trying to act out of a storybook, when I should be concerned with reality. I need to make the best possible story to lift the hearts of the populace, and these defenses will help with that. Thank you, Magnus. Truly, I don't know what I'd do without you. The old mage waved his hand dismissively at the compliment. Out of the corner of his eye, the prince noticed a shifting distortion in the air to his side, rapidly approaching. Although he couldn't make out any details, he knew immediately who it was. Turning quickly, he began walking quickly in the opposite direction, trying to pretend he hadn't seen it. Hold it right there, Kane. What do you think you're doing? An indistinct voice halted the impoverished escape before it could begin. Slowly, the prince turned, an artificial smile on his lips. Oh, good morning, Sibylla. You're not usually awake this early, are you? The hazy figure neared, although no specific facial features stood out. A feeling of irritation radiated from the form. So you sneak out while you know I'll be asleep? Honestly, your irresponsibility boggles the mind. Have you no consideration for your own importance? Walking up to the pair, Magnus tried to placate the fuming spy. It's fine, Sibylla, he was with me. No harm would come to him with the great magician at his side. The blur rounded on the elderly man with renewed hostility. Don't you, great magician, me. I know you only just got here. You aren't covering for Kane this time. Magnus shrugged towards Kane. Sorry, he tried. Prince Kane was indeed thankful for the attempt. Look, you're in the middle of a major city, in the part with the highest security, let alone an enemy of the kingdom. I would be surprised if anything shady could get near me. On the other side of the street, unnoticed by anyone present, a demon who was despised by all sapient life and a golem who wanted to conquer the world pushed through the early morning crowds towards the dungeon's entrance. Sibylla was unmoved by this argument. I could easily infiltrate a city like this without being noticed. If somebody of my skill level had targeted you, you would be a corpse right now. Letting out an exasperated sigh, Kane lifted his arms. And who exactly would want to kill me that badly? Irrelevant. From now on, you go nowhere without informing me first. If you sneak off again, I'll force you to sign a contract. Kane's face twisted in a combination of horror and disgust. That wasn't just an empty threat. Sibylla would actually do it. As annoying as it was, Kane would just have to do as she said. Wishing to change the subject something less depressing, the prince scanned the surroundings. Everyone else is here. Where's Shin? A vague arm gestured towards the dungeon. He's in there, killing things. You know how he is. Kane placed a hand against his rugged chin. I like Shin, but he's a bit, morbid, isn't he? Why is he always going on about death and killing? I think it has something to do with his unique skill. Magnus looked towards the dungeon as well, a somber look on his usually cheery face. It's a twist at his personality. He's a good lad, deep down, I think, but it's hard to be coated in that much blood every day without it getting to you. Well, Kane shifted uncomfortably. He probably has the right idea. It's good to get as much as you can cleared out as possible before the wave. Get a head start on things. Maybe we should join him. Magnus nodded his head sagely. Indeed, and we can count kills, then get today as part of our achievement. Make the story extra juicy. What? A look of shock crossed the prince's face. That's even more underhanded than the many fourths. Magnus merely shrugged. End of chapter. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, please consider supporting the author from the link down below. Otherwise, if you wish to support this channel, there are numerous ways to do so, like liking, subscribing, and possibly even becoming a patron. Otherwise, the easiest way would be to share. And until the next video, I hope that you all have a good one, and I'll see you then. Cheers.